So at this point, we have adjusted these settings in camera and picked a lens that we are happy with. So now we need to actually go out and film something. But once you've picked a subject, how do you frame them? How do you place them in the scene? Well, in this episode, I'm going to talk about some of the top composition and framing techniques that you want to pay very close attention to when you are filming your video. Because the way that we frame our videos can have a big effect on, one, how professional it looks, and two, how the footage is perceived. So what type of story is it telling? So the first technique that I want to talk about is the rule of thirds. Now, the rule of thirds is a very simple technique. Draw 2 vertical lines and 2 horizontal lines. You can also turn on this grid line in your camera. Most cameras will give you this option. So you can pop this onto your monitor to help you visualize that. Now, generally, this works by placing people or horizons on the grid lines. So if you were filming a landscape, you could place the horizon on the bottom line or the top line. And then if you were filming people, you could place them on either one of those lines. Of course, it's not just landscapes and people that you can use the rule of thirds on. You can use the rule of thirds in a very creative way and use this to frame up virtually anything. Now, it is called the rule of thirds, but this is not a rule. You don't have to frame up everything using the rule of thirds. You can break this rule. And an example of that is using symmetry. So rather than placing somebody on a grid line, you can place them smack bang in the center of the camera like this shot. Although you would probably argue actually that this side is probably heavier than this side. And by heavier, I mean there's more going on over here. A true example of symmetry is having something in the middle and both sides of the shot are perfectly balanced, so one doesn't have too much going on versus the other. Using symmetry in your framing can look really cinematic and it can help to make your videos more visually interesting and therefore look more professional. It's also worth looking out for leading lines as well. Leading lines are essentially just something in the frame that takes your eye on a journey. So if we're taking a video of a landscape and we can see a road going off into the distance, we could use this as a leading line to draw our eyes towards a specific point in the frame. Now, a really quick example of using leading lines in the real world, if we are taking a video of a skyline or a landscape, you could bring the camera low to the ground, place the camera next to a curb, and you could use the line from that curb to point you towards a specific skyscraper on the landscape. This is taking your eye from that path, it's going all the way down that curb and taking you to that visual interest, this point of interest. Again, you don't have to use leading lines all the time, but if you can, leading lines can actually really create powerful composition. We also have a frame within a frame, and this is exactly what it sounds like. Frame within a frame is framing your subject within a frame in the frame. So an example of this would be filming somebody walking through a tunnel or a subway tunnel. The tunnel is going to be used as the frame and then the subject is the person walking. You could also have somebody standing in front of a window and frame up the outside of the window as well. Or you could shoot through a gap in a fence and use that as a frame within a frame. Essentially, we're looking through something to the subject. This is really good because it creates depth, it's creating different layers within the frame, but it also looks really professional. Now, one big mistake that I see when it comes to beginner filmmakers and composition is not enough or too much headroom. When I say headroom, I'm referring to the gap between the top of the head to the top of the frame. Typically, you'll see loads of headroom or you'll see not enough headroom. Generally, you want there to be enough breathing room so that it's not claustrophobic like this, but you also want to make sure there's not miles of headroom. You want this to be roughly about a fist, maybe half a fist, just a small gap between the top of the head and the top of the frame. The problem is if they're cutting off, then the shot doesn't look right, but if they're too far down, then it doesn't feel balanced. So try and get that perfect headroom. This will feel unnatural to begin with, by the way, but over time, you'll naturally just be able to snap the camera into place and get that perfect headroom every time. It can be a little bit more difficult when you are filming yourself, though, in an environment like this, where you can't quite see the monitor. So in that case, I would start the camera, start filming, run into the scene, do 10 seconds of filming, run back and check the frame. And if you're too far away from the top of the frame, then you can go ahead and tilt the camera down or sit up. Or if you're overlapping the top of the frame, then you can just tilt the camera up. Now, the next two are quite similar and they go hand in hand. So this is pick a dominant subject and fill the frame with the subject. Now, when I say subject, it doesn't just mean person. This could be whatever you are filming. So if you're filming a video of a car, the subject is the car. If you're filming a landscape and there's a big skyscraper, that skyscraper is the subject. And you want to basically fill the frame with this subject. Now, if you look at this video clip, my challenge to you is, what is the dominant subject? What am I supposed to be looking at? It's all just a bit confusing. Nothing really stands out. So what's the point of this? Now, when you look at this clip, you can see this person is clearly the dominant subject. They are filling the frame. We know this is the subject. This is who we are supposed to be looking at. And that's a mistake that I see all the time. Either there's no clear dominant subject, or if there is, they're framed quite small in the frame, or there's too much headroom and they're just not filling the frame. We want them to fill the frame to understand what we are looking at. Because making videos isn't just about pretty videos, it is about telling a story and creating a narrative. And if we can't understand what we're looking at or where we should be looking, then it's going to be very difficult to create that clear narrative. So make sure you fill the frame and make sure you have a clear subject. And then my last one, and this is going to make all the difference to your videos, create depth. Now, when I say depth, think about splitting your scene into 3 different sections. You've got your subject, and then the space that occupies in front of them is the foreground, and the space behind them is the background. So you've got foreground, subject, background. You want to try and place something in each of these layers when you can. Now, most people will only think about the subject, this one-dimensional flat plane, what's going on here. But in order to make your videos look more cinematic and create depth, you want to think about the foreground and the background. Now, it doesn't have to be on every shot, and if it did happen on every shot, it would feel quite distracting. But every now and then, think about what's going on in the foreground, and especially what's going on in the background. I'll give you an example. This shot here looks quite flat. All I've done is think about the subject, but this shot instantly looks more dramatic, and that's because I've placed something in the foreground. Like I said, you don't want to be doing this on every single shot in your sequence, but just thinking about the 3 different spaces is really going to help you to step up your filmmaking and create more interesting shot choices. I've also got one more bonus tip, and that is to think about your angles. Don't just always grab your camera and film from eye level. This is a really boring angle, and this is the angle that we are all seeing every single day. Instead, think outside the box. Would what I'm filming look more interesting from a low angle? Looking up to this is going to create power. It could create some leading lines. It could look really powerful and a great composition. Or alternatively, what happens if I went above and shot down? Would this create a more interesting angle? So don't just always think about filming everything from eye line. Think about your low angles, your high angles, and think about how you can make the shot feel different. And there you go. These are all of my tips on how to create a really nice, professional, balanced, cinematic shot, because framing and composition is really important. Even if we get all of the correct camera settings and everything else goes right, if we frame our images poorly, then unfortunately your videos just are not going to look good. So really think about your composition and framing, and I would definitely advise you going out and practicing as many of these as possible. Because once you get used to these, you'll naturally look for these as soon as you pick up the camera. So write out a list with all of these: symmetry, rule of thirds, leading lines, diagonal balance, and so on. Go out and practice each and every one of these. And my challenge to you is to go to one location and get every single example of this filmed in that one location. Don't go to a different location to find something. Really look at the space and analyze it to see, can I get a leading line here? Can I film this from a low angle? Can I implement rule of thirds here? And that will really help you to spot out all of these different techniques. I would love to see your work as well, and I would love to help you improve your work. So if you do this exercise, please film it and upload it, and place a link to that in the comment section below, and I will reply.